Today, we're diving into the life of one of the most powerful, influential, and, let's be honest, brutal figures of the 20th century, Joseph Stalin. He's the dictator who forged the Soviet Union into a superpower, and he did it through sheer, unrelenting terror. This quote really says it all, doesn't it? When Stalin finally died in 1953, the end of his 24-year reign, it wasn't just a political shift. For millions upon millions of people, it was like being released from an absolute nightmare. It just captures the incredible depth of fear and hatred the man inspired.
So how did he do it? How did a boy from a poor family in Georgia climb his way up to command a superpower holding absolute control over hundreds of millions of lives? Well, his story is a truly chilling masterclass in ambition, manipulation, and brutality.
To really get a handle on the dictator, you have to first understand the man. And that story, it doesn't begin with power. It begins with struggle and a very carefully crafted identity.
He wasn't born Stalin. No, his name was Joseph Jugavashvili. He was a poor kid whose face was permanently scarred by smallpox. His devout mother actually sent him to a seminary to become a priest, but he found a different kind of religion in the revolutionary writings of Marx and Lenin. He even chose a new name for himself, Stalin. In Russian, it means man of steel, and he would spend the rest of his life living up to that name. So how did this young revolutionary start climbing the ladder? It wasn't through brilliant speeches or anything like that. No, it was through crime, loyalty, and a ruthless, almost genius understanding of bureaucratic power. You know, before he was a politician, Stalin was basically a gangster. He wasn't just sitting around debating theory. He was out on the streets organizing bank robberies, kidnappings, and extortion rackets, all to get money for the Bolshevik Party. This made him a really valuable, if incredibly ruthless, asset to its leader, Vladimir Lenin. But even though he was useful, a lot of the party's inner circle kind of looked down on him. The intellectuals, guys like his great rival, Leon Trotsky, they saw Stalin as nothing more than a crude, violent thug. They fatally underestimated him. They saw an enforcer, not a leader. And that was their biggest mistake. He turned that underestimation into his greatest weapon. In 1922, he took on this seemingly boring administrative job of general secretary. But Stalin saw its hidden potential. He used that position to methodically place his own loyal supporters in key roles all across the party. He controlled who got promotions, who got demoted, and, this is the key, even who was told about important meetings. He was building an army right inside the government. You can see exactly how he used this power against his main rival, Trotsky. It's almost comical if it weren't so sinister. When Lenin died, Stalin famously gave Trotsky the wrong date for the funeral. So Stalin stands there, leading the procession, looking like the heir apparent, while Trotsky's a no-show. From there, he just used his bureaucratic machine to completely isolate Trotsky, kick him out of the party, and eventually, years later, hunt him down in Mexico and have him assassinated. So with all his rivals out of the way, Stalin was the undisputed leader by 1929. And now, he turned his attention to his grand vision, transforming the huge peasant nation of the Soviet Union into a modern industrial giant. And he didn't care about the human cost. He launched a series of incredibly aggressive 5-year plans. The goal was to industrialize, and fast, massively increasing production of things like coal, steel, and electricity. But the first step was this radical overhaul of agriculture called collectivization, where millions of peasants were just stripped of their land, which was then reorganized into these enormous state-run farms. The result was a catastrophe on a scale that's hard to even imagine. The government just seized all the crops and livestock to feed the factory workers or sell it abroad, and this led directly to the worst man-made famine in history. As many as 10 million people just starved to death. And the terror did not stop there. Factory workers were given impossible production quotas. And if you failed, or if you were simply labeled an enemy of the state, you could be executed or sentenced to the labor camps. In total, an estimated 20 million people were swept into this system. The Gulag, that was the real engine of Stalin's industrialization. It was this vast network of slave labor camps, many of them in the frozen wastelands of Siberia. Prisoners were forced into 14-hour workdays in sub-freezing temperatures, mining coal, chopping lumber, all on starvation rations. It was slavery, plain and simple, on an industrial scale. To maintain this insane level of control, Stalin built this all-encompassing cult of personality around himself. Propaganda made him out to be this all-wise, perfect leader. His portrait hung in every home, every factory, and as this quote shows, children were taught in school that their loyalty was to Stalin first, before their own parents. All the while, everyone was being watched by his secret police, the ruthless NKVD. As his power grew, so did his paranoia. In the mid-1930s, he unleashed a new wave of terror that we now call the Great Purge. It was an act of political self-destruction that would leave his own country dangerously, fatally vulnerable. The purge kicked off in 1934, and it targeted anyone Stalin even remotely saw as a threat. And critically, it just tore through the military. He had 81 of his 103 top generals and admirals executed. Can you imagine? Then, somehow convinced he'd secured peace, he signed a pact with Hitler. 2 years later, Hitler invaded. The Red Army, leaderless and completely gutted by Stalin's own hand, was caught by surprise and suffered the most catastrophic loss. As his army was collapsing, what was Stalin's response? Better strategy? Nope. More terror. He issued the infamous Order 227, not one step back. He literally placed special units behind his own front lines with one job: shoot any of their own soldiers who tried to retreat. It was a simple, brutal calculation. Face a German bullet in front of you, or a Soviet one behind you. But against all odds, the Soviet Union won, powered by that same industrial machine Stalin had built and paid for with over 25 million lives. The Red Army pushed the Nazis all the way back to Berlin. And after the war, at the Potsdam Conference, Stalin refused to give up the Eastern European countries his army had liberated. He just absorbed them into a communist buffer zone, creating the Eastern Bloc and setting the stage for the next 45 years of global conflict, the Cold War. So that brings us to the end of his story, and the really complicated, deeply contradictory legacy he left behind. Was he the architect of a superpower, or was he the master of a slaughterhouse? The disturbing answer is, he was both. Stalin's reign of terror finally ended on March 5, 1953, when he died of a stroke. His death immediately sparked this intense power struggle among his inner circle, which was eventually won by Nikita Khrushchev. And Khrushchev, ironically, would be the man who later, in his famous secret speech, would denounce Stalin and reveal the full, horrifying scale of his crimes to the world. And this right here is the central conflict of his legacy. On one hand, you have the superpower architect, right? The guy who industrialized a nation, led the defeat of Nazi Germany, and made the USSR a nuclear power. But on the other hand, you have the mass murderer, responsible for famine, purges, the entire Gulag system, and a culture of absolute terror that claimed tens of millions of lives. And that is the question we're left with, isn't it? It's a legacy of triumph built on a foundation of unimaginable, unbelievable human suffering. There are no easy answers here. Just a stark reminder of how one man's will, forged in steel, could reshape the world and, at the very same time, create a vision of hell right here on Earth.